Welcome back to the Aliens and Angels podcast. Today I'm very excited to bring back one of my favorite guests, Preston Dennett. Preston Dennett began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, also known as MUFON. He's a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of over 30 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. You can find more about Preston Dennett at www.prestondennett.weebly.com. And of course, all the links are featured below in the description. Please do check me out, subscribe to my channels, leave me a comment, like my videos, and please do share my content with your friends. Well, without further ado, here he is, Preston Dennett. Hi, Preston.
Hi, Karen. How are you?
Good. I'm good. And I'm really excited because I just finished reading your science fiction novel. Now, you're really well known for your nonfiction books telling about other people's experiences, but I only recently found out that you also write science fiction. And Wild Speculation is a collection of 10 science fiction stories. And I just loved it, Preston. I couldn't put the book down. It was so good. And I want to tell the audience about it. And perhaps we can talk a little bit about some of the chapters so that people can see that the stories are so different. Each one is completely different and a whole new adventure.
Yeah, I was so excited to put that book together because I've been a huge science fiction fan for pretty much all my life. Actually, I kind of grew up thinking I was going to write science fiction, and really in college took a lot of science classes because of that. Majored in narrative writing, and of course took a left turn into the Twilight Zone and ended up writing about actual ETs instead of science fictional ETs.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly had a real hard time trying to get stories published initially because I was pretty young, didn't have a whole lot of life experience, but it's always something I wanted to do. And I was actually making some good progress. I did get one story published. It won an award, but I kind of fell out of it because UFOs were so interesting. But as time went on, I realized, I still love it. I really think I could be good at it. So I started writing some more stories, and yeah, how cool to find out that editors did like my stories and started, sending personal rejection letters. But ultimately, yeah, I started selling them pretty quick and now sold like 40 different stories, real short ones to, novelettes, a couple of novellas, and over 40 of them of all different kinds.
Yeah, and I love the way you have done two things. Well, besides the way you write the stories, but you put in a forward talking about your adventures, what you went through just to get them published. And then after each story, you talk about how each story, what it took to get it published and where it got published, and some of the amazing reviews that you received. But what's interesting too is you sort of had a cult following without realizing it, where you were submitting your stories, and although they weren't being accepted for the magazines, the editors and I guess the other staff at the magazines and stuff kind of had a name for you and knew of you and were cheering you on, but you didn't know that behind the scenes until much later. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because that's pretty interesting too.
Yeah, it was a really shocking thing, actually, and quite an interesting story because I was submitting furiously and getting personal rejection letters from major magazines like Analog and Asimov's and FNSF and some of these big magazines. And wasn't really sure, what that meant. Because as a young man and as a young writer, I didn't realize that's pretty rare to get personal, notes on your story. Normally you will get a form rejection. And after just not getting the success I wanted, because I was at this for 4 or 5 years and not really selling anything, I dropped out because I got pulled into UFOs. And it was years later, I'm like, you know what? Let's fulfill this dream. It's something I've always wanted to do. Let's start writing. And there was this contest called the Writers of the Future contest, which is for amateur writers. You can't have published more than 3 professional stories to enter this contest. And I always knew I could win it. I knew I could. I just had an intuitive feeling I could win this contest. So I started entering, and of course got rejected again because I'd already tried entering it. But it's a very long-running contest. It's been around for decades. And I started entering and started getting honorable mentions. But of course, you can get, a silver honorable mention or a semi-finalist or a finalist. And I wasn't getting that. I was just getting one honorable mention after another, and rejections as well. But it was cool because there was a forum on this contest, the Writers of the Future forum. They have a little blog. And so I would go there for inspiration. I learned more on that little forum there than all the years in college and writing class, because these are people who are there doing it. Some have had fantastic success. And there was this one thread, this one topic about not giving up. And I thought, you know what? That's me. I did give up. And now I'm back in it, and I'm starting to be discouraged. So I was scrolling through this forum, and someone said, they're all talking about don't give up, success will happen. And then I read this comment that knocked me over. And one guy said, I will never give up. I heard the Topanga Canyon story about a gentleman who was this close to the finish line, and all the editors loved him, and they were talking about who was going to publish his first story, and even the book editors were paying attention. And then he dropped out, and no one ever heard from him again. I lived in Topanga. I knew in my bones that was me. Mm-hmm. And this is actually a workshop taught by a very famous and successful writer, actually a winner of the Writers of the Future contest, but now like hugely successful, Dean Wesley Smith, would teach this workshop, a cautionary tale, which he called Topanga Canyon, Don't Give Up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is me. So I actually contacted him. I'm like, hi, I'm not sure if you know or if you can verify this, but am I Topanga Canyon? Because I remember him. He was an editor of Pulp House magazine, and he would send me some of these notes saying, you're so close, keep trying. And I knocked his socks off. He says, yep, that's you. And like,
wow, what a thrill. Oh my gosh, what a lesson.
Yeah, so that gave me the inspiration to keep on trying for this contest. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, I won. I actually won this contest after 46 tries. I got second place. There's first, second, and third place. I got to be published in annual compilation of stories. So it went full circle. I went from being, rejected to actually, becoming a cautionary tale to being a story of success.
And then there was no stopping you after that. Oh, fantastic.
No, it was so cool because, finding that out was, that the editors were actually liking my stories, but not quite. It was, oh my gosh, devastating, but at the same time, so thrilling. Mm-hmm. So it was a very cool thing. So yeah, if you're a fan of science fiction and you're really into it, you may have heard the Topanga Canyon story. That's me.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. I just going to take a moment to say hi to some of the people in the chat. We've got Dolly Saffron, very fond of Dolly. Dolly and Preston are going to be on the Aliens and Angels podcast in October. I can't wait. We've got Heidi Hansen in the audience, and we've got someone I haven't seen for a while, Eddie Gannon. For those of you who like music, please check out Eddie's channel. He plays the guitar and he sings soulful ballads. He's got a beautiful voice, and it's just so lovely to see you See you, Eddie. And let's see. Oh, Dolly says, I've read all of Preston's science fiction. He is darn good. He sure is. So, what's interesting about this too, Preston, is I always wanted to be a writer, and I never really got started. I wrote one article that I submitted to a magazine, and I actually got a handwritten rejection letter. And for those of you who don't know, if your writing is acceptable, but just not they just for whatever reason don't want to publish it, maybe they don't have the room or whatever, something better comes along, they'll send out well, they might not send out anything, you might just never hear back from them. And if your stuff is noteworthy, they might send you a form letter. To get a handwritten letter means we're close, we're really close, because they wouldn't bother to take the time to do that otherwise, because they have thousands, if not more, submissions all the time. So the fact that you got so many handwritten rejection letters, that's almost, not quite, but almost, you're just almost there. And so I just wanted to bring that out. Um, I just wanted to bring that out for any of you who are writing and hope to be published one day. And it's just I myself am working on my book, which tells my story of ET contact. It's not as easy as you think it's going to be, because not only do we want to get down everything as accurately as possible, but we also want to make it so it's what do you call eligible, well, like readable, that the grammar's done right and the spelling, and there's all that. Of course, we have spell check now, which helps a lot, but I am not going to use AI or anything like that. I want it to be real and from myself. And it's also important for me to write it in a way that the reader enjoys it, that they step into my experience with me, into my memory with me. And what was so lovely about reading Wild Speculation, which is actually the first book of Preston's that I've actually read, I've been meaning to, but we won't get into that. It's just the amount of descriptive language is perfect. It's not too much and it's not too little. So each story, as I was reading it, I was on the edge of my seat. I was right there. I was seeing it all unfold around me, and I just loved it. And it was a really excellent example for me working on my book on how much descriptive language to actually use. So I find some books, they do too much descriptive language and they want to describe every tree and every leaf. And I can't follow the story because I get lost in these little kind of tributaries of the story. But with Preston's writing, oh my God, I cannot recommend Wild Speculation enough. It's 10 science fiction stories. So it's something you can do while you're making dinner, and then you can put it down and get back to it later. I don't recommend you do it while you're babysitting, because I'm telling you, it's so engaging. And I just want to just check in with the chat. Sorry for rambling a bit. There's Dolly and Heidi. And yeah, so for those of you who are just joining us, both Preston and Dolly Saffron will be on again on the Aliens and Angels podcast in October. So you want to mark your calendars and subscribe so that you get notifications, and then you can come back then. So, Preston, I'm wondering if we could, is there anything else you want to say before we get into the book, or do you mind if I just make some observations of each story? Now, we don't want to give the stories away because a lot of them have a twist at the end, which makes it even more lovely, because none of these stories are what I would call predictable. Did not see where it was going to go, which just, led me to be even more excited and engaged. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we get into a couple of the chapters?
Just thank you for the glowing reviews. I try real hard to make my stories accessible, easy to read. This is a huge trick with any kind of writing. You want to have imagery. You need to put people in the scene right away so that they know where you are and who's there and so forth. But yeah, I have so much fun with these. So it was really a joy to put together.
And they're also different. I'm going, Preston, where did you come up with this? Like, you've got an incredible imagination. So, like I said, I don't want to give the stories away because I really, really want the listeners and the viewers to buy this book. It is worth its weight in gold. You'll want to go back and read it again and again because it's just so captivating. But I was going to say, the whole concepts, all the concepts are so different. For instance, in the chapter called Tears Not of a Child, that is very, very interesting. Do you want to say anything about that story, Preston? How did you come up with that?
Yeah, I think it's really important, especially in science fiction, that you want to explore an idea that's absolutely new. Oh, Kitty, Kitty wants to say hi.
Aww.
So yeah, you want to have an original idea. It's got to be
Mhm.
absolutely original. And that idea for that story just dropped into my head, which is really about sort of uh, age and growing old and how to deal with that. And this is actually the idea of the story is about stopping the aging process. And there's this whole treatment that the main character goes through. And like you said, I do like to put a twist in all my stories. And this story just kind of dropped into my head, almost fully formed. I knew how it was going to end. I knew had a really good ending for this story, and it did really well. It got great praise from various magazines who didn't quite have the room to publish it. And I learned that it's not a rejection doesn't mean the story is bad at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
It just means that they didn't have the room for it, or it didn't quite grab them, or there was a story that they just published that was too similar, perhaps.
Mhm.
But I knew I could sell this story because it was short, and it's a really poignant story, actually,
It
where
really is.
this married
And
couple deals with this issue.
And it's something that we all go through if we live long enough, and that is dealing with our advancing age, dealing with it. We can't do the things we used to do anymore. And, we often look back into our past and, wish we were young again. But to be honest with you, I would never go back because what I know now makes my life much richer. Heidi wants to know, Preston, will this book also be available in an Audible? And I know Dolly posted in the live chat, not yet, that you're looking for a reader.
Yeah,
So I
my
guess.
favorite reader that I work with, Aaron Miller, is working on my other book, Humanoids and High Strangeness. And I also have another guy I really like, and he said he'll do it, but he's busy with another project right now. Yeah,
Mhm.
it will be on Audible. I'd love to do it myself, honestly, but I don't have the equipment or the know-how. Maybe one of these days. But yeah, absolutely, it will be on Audible because I love this story. That's why I put it first in the collection. And
Mhm.
it's about where we reach a technological level where we're basically able to stop the aging process.
Mhm.
And this couple is going through that, but they decide that they're going to grow old because they want to experience that. And yeah, I can't give away too much because it's a pretty short
No, I
story.
don't. Yeah. Yeah, it's really great. And then that's followed by Greetings from Earth, and that's a different kind of abduction story. That's how I would call it.
Yeah, some of my stories do feature the UFO subject, and this one is about an alien artifact that appears on Earth that's absolutely baffling all the scientists. No one can figure it out. It's covered up initially, but finally it goes public, and this alien artifact becomes really nothing more than a tourist attraction. because no one can figure it out. It's this big giant. Actually, it's the cover of the book with the big orb. Uh, is the illustration
Yeah.
of that particular story. And the husband decides to bring his wife to see it. And she has this immediate connection to this object and gets pulled inside of it. And I can't say what happens next because it's a really cool twist to a very famous, well-worn trope, an idea of the alien artifact. So I had so much fun with this story. It got an honorable mention in the Writers of the Future. And finally, I'm sending it out to, I found another contest. I'm like, hey, this one looks like a good contest. And it won first place in the science fiction category. And this contest covers every genre, from mystery to thriller to romance. And they offer grand prizes for all the entries. I won second place in the grand prize category. So I got 2 little cash prizes, got published in their anthology. And I knew this story was a good one. So I was puzzled why people weren't accepting it. Because it's a light, fun story. It's not super serious.
Yeah.
But I loved it. Gosh, I've got to get this story published. And then it won. I'm like, whoa, first place. Very cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was very interesting. And again, everything that you write has a bit of a
Yeah.
a
And no one will
twist.
ever guess what that alien artifact is until you get to the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really good. And then there was Enter a Human. And that was really interesting too, because we tend to think of extraterrestrials and stereotypes. And this totally busts the stereotype. We also seem to think in human-centric terms, where we think that we're at the top of the heap and that it's all about us and other beings must be just like us, and maybe not. And I thought it was wonderful the way you described the beings and their interaction, and finally having an interaction with a human. I thought it was just priceless.
Yeah, I love that story because I love comedy. And this was sort of a sci-fi humor piece. And
Hmm.
humor is somewhat subjective, so you never know. But it kind of wrote itself. And it's a story about a lady who's an artist here on Earth and has all kinds of unexplained experiences. And she's quite successful as an artist when a UFO comes down and takes her on board, and it turns out that the ET is basically a talent scout looking for an artist to present to a contest that's kind of galactic. And it goes on from there. It's a fun story, it's lighthearted, but at the same time, really raises some serious social issues about our own planet.
Hmm.
And the last line, when that dropped into my head and I was able to put it down the way I want, I laughed my butt off because it worked. So it was just funny. It's a funny story.
It is. It's yeah. None of these stories are frightening, although I have to say the salvage yard does get quite intense. But and Elephant City gets a bit intense. We'll talk a little bit about it, but they're not frightening. They're just you're on the edge of your seat. If I had fingernails to bite, I would be biting them. Excuse me. So then there was Stars Are Wild. Now that was another one that busts the extraterrestrial stereotypes. Wouldn't you say so, Preston?
Yeah, that's another story I really enjoyed writing because I feel like it's a pretty unique idea. And this is about a lady, Gracie Megan Sparks, who's a very successful musician and starts getting these psychic impressions of music from a place she's not really sure where it's coming from, and writes this song, and it becomes a huge hit. And then they find out that there's this planet on the far edge of the solar system where there are these, quote, music trees, and they're playing her song. And it's a really interesting sort of, each story has multiple levels to it. It's partly a
Mhm.
romance story. It's partly an adventure story. It's partly an alien contact story. I've really realized that the best stories have drama. They have humor. They have romance. They have, an element of suspense. So
Mm-hmm.
this one really worked out well. It's a pretty long story.
Mm-hmm.
Basically a first contact story with a really unusual twist in terms of the type of ET, which is more plant than animal, really.
Mm-hmm. And I love the ending, and I'm not going to give it away, but the ending was very touching, very, very touching. And yeah, I know the same with Tears Not of a Child. The ending again was very touching and just the perfect ending
I've
to
really come to
perfect
realize
stories.
that when you're writing fiction in particular, because nonfiction is a completely different beast. You know, you're basically a translator. You're trying to
Mm-hmm.
portray people's events accurately and in a way that's interesting as well. But you have to follow the facts. You can't make stuff
Mm-hmm.
up at all.
Mm-hmm.
Where here you have complete control. And I really, really love surprising the reader with twists at the end, which is
Mm-hmm.
difficult to do. And
It,
I
i- it
wrote.
it is because I did not see any of the endings. I did not see them coming, and it was they ended in a way that gave me some closure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you have to
Um,
have a satisfying ending if you want the
mhm.
reader to be satisfied. You need to tie up those loose ends. You need to surprise them in a way that's also convincing. Because if it just goes off the deep end, it's not going to work. And I have to tell you, Karen, I wrote 46 stories before I got my first one published. So I had a lot of practice with writing bad stuff before I finally kind of figured out some of the, my, what would I call it, recipe or method
Mhm.
to produce a
Mhm.
good story. Oh, this cat insists on being on the desk.
Well, I don't mind if you don't mind. I've got two cats myself. They're my furry babies. And right now they're not bothering me, but when they want attention, they want attention. And that's what we do. We love them and you know, they don't understand what we're doing when we're on, doing a podcast.
Or maybe they
Oh,
do. I don't know.
or maybe they do. Um, so I wanted to shift a little bit into can you spare a dollar? What I loved about this story, again, did not see where it was going or where it was heading, but it was very touched my soul, touched my heart. And it's basically about extraterrestrials who judge other worlds and other beings on their ability to have compassion for each other. Would you say that sort of nails
Yeah,
um, the
that's
theme?
the theme for sure. Yeah, Clifford Simak is a very well-known and award-winning science fiction writer, and he's probably my favorite. And he has this really interesting, sort of quiet style, very powerful pacing and settings to his stories, and I just love his work. And so I kind of adopted that style for this story
Mm-hmm.
because he likes
Mm-hmm.
writing about small towns and ETs. He said he would never write an alien invasion story because he doesn't find it credible. He says
Mm-hmm.
an advanced race would have no interest in taking over another planet. I found out
Mm-hmm.
recently he's written about UFOs, so that was kind of cool. But yeah, this story was one of the earlier stories I wrote. I think it was the first one I actually got, well, second that I got published.
Mm-hmm.
And I just loved the way it turned out. The characters are in the setting and the theme, all of this stuff comes together. And it was a fun story, which I think has a really important commentary, again, on the state of our planet and how we
Yep.
treat each other in
Yep.
terms of, the elderly and the sick and how we govern over each other and the power struggles and the division of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
All of this is a
Yep.
yardstick for how spiritually evolved we are, how
Mm-hmm.
ethical, how moral, which ETs, as you know, take that very seriously. This is something they've moved beyond. They don't war with each other. They're not building nuclear bombs and genociding their populations. That's us.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a sort of a commentary on that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. I just loved it. You know, a lot of people, there's a lot of controversy. A lot of people are afraid of ETs. A lot of people are caught up in dogma. They think ETs are demons and they're here to hurt us and stuff. But when we move past that, really, my experiences have been amazingly positive. There are sometimes scary elements in people's experiences, but usually in hindsight, it's because they weren't prepared mentally or mature enough, even psychologically or spiritually, to understand it in its proper context. So I often get not every single time, but usually on my shows, there's at least one comment where they're going, "Be careful, they're demons," and this and that. I have not seen that. I think that fear is an externalization of the truth about humanity. We are not as advanced as we think we are. And to me, it's obvious, maybe not to everyone else, but we've got some work to do. Let's just put it that way. We got
The way
some
you
work
put
to
it,
do.
externalization, we're sort of exerting our own beliefs and putting them on them. We treat each other
Yeah,
horribly, so we expect others to treat that way. We're
yeah,
placing our own values, our own belief system, overlaying on them.
yeah.
No,
Projection.
the reality.
I think
Yeah,
it's called projection,
yeah,
projecting it onto.
that's the word.
And and I don't think there's any need. So although these stories are science fiction, they still have important messages. So they're not only well written, they're not only delightful to read, they're so engaging, but then they've also got lessons that we do well to pay attention. Preston, I want to just take 2 minutes to do a promotion, and then we'll come right back and continue talking about the book. So we'll just do that now, and then we'll be right back, everybody. Hi guys, break time for a short message. YouTube will not monetize me, so if you enjoy my content and want to support my efforts, help me to cover my expenses by visiting my shop to buy yourself a beautiful orgone generator. Zendome's Orgonite are my unique brand, and they are ethically sourced, handmade, and double charged for maximum effect. They are only available through my website, www.karenholtonhealthcoach.com. Many people are finding comfort with Zendome's orgone generators, commonly called Orgonite. They are a simple compound which balance ambient energy by converting negative energy and EMF into positive healing energy with many easily confirmed health benefits. They are a simple compound with alchemic and energetic properties. These devices function as self-driven, continuously operating, highly efficient, negative to positive energy transmutation factories. They help diminish the harmful effects of electromagnetic frequency radiation by attracting and converting negative energies, retuning them into new and more healthful sound and light wave patterns, and they help to purify the atmosphere and accelerate plant growth. They also help stimulate positive mood and are a natural remedy for poor sleep patterns. When Orgonite is within range of any corded or wireless electronic device, it will efficiently and continuously transform that energy into orgone as it is being transmitted. This essentially creates orgone energy transmitters out of any and all emitters of harmful negative energy. You can use these devices for focusing the mind, healing, meditation, and for spiritual growth. Zendome's Orgonite are my unique brand of orgone generators, and they are only available through my website. Don't be fooled by imitations. Check out my website to see my latest selection at www.karenholtonhealthcoach.com. That's KarenHolton healthcoach.com. Check them out today. Now, let's get back to the show. And we're back. So we're talking today about Preston Dennett's science fiction novel called Wild Speculation. It's actually a collection of short stories, and I just loved it so much. As I said earlier in the show, I was on the edge of my seat through the whole thing. I just love it. Each story is completely unique. I don't know how Preston could come up with so many different ideas. And I want to talk now a bit about the story called Storm of Chance. I would classify that as being about shifting timelines. I don't know if you want to say a little bit about that, Preston.
Yeah, this is sort of a popular theme in science fiction. Aliens, of course, is probably the number one, but time travel and there's all kinds of ideas that people like to explore. Probable reality is just kind of how I would look at it, but shifting timelines, I think, works. Uh, and that's what this story is about, where basically the Earth gets hit by what they call probability storms, where basically various timelines become all meshed up, and one thing that might be true suddenly isn't true because all these probable realities are meandering around each other, and yet the main character is somehow immune. She is immune from all of this shifts that are going on in people's lives. Not her husband, not her, all the people around her are really suffering from this. So one day, one of these storms will hit and it'll be a different president, or the house next door is gone, and all these different things that you thought reality was stable, not so much. And they can't really figure out what's going on. Of course, the answer does come at some point. But the real
Mhm.
twist is, why is this main character, why is she immune? And it's a story I really enjoyed. And it's funny, I actually wrote this story with a cliche, which I found out you're never supposed to do, which is starting a story with somebody waking up. This is
Mhm.
considered cliche, and if you send in a story to the various magazines, they will reject it right off the bat. And so I took that out and I sent it off, and it got published immediately. I'm like, oh, okay, who
Interesting.
knew? Who knew that that was a thing?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
yeah, again, it has a real poignant twist at the end, which I think will take readers by surprise. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's a it's an interesting idea because the whole mystery is, why is this person immune? Which it's yeah, I mean, it's hard to say a whole lot about it without giving it away.
Yeah, I don't want you to give it away. Let's just say it's a little bit like the Mandela effect on steroids, and you're the only one that remembers how things were at each origin, I guess.
I love
But
that. Yeah, I wish I had thought of that. Yeah, that's
yeah,
exactly what it's
but
like.
you, you probably wrote it before the Mandela effect even became a popular topic for science fiction. Or could it be science fact? To be honest with you, I have a few shifts in the Mandela effect myself that I've seen that, well, we don't have to get into that. That's a whole nother topic. But yeah, it just sort of reminded me of it. And then there was Elephant City. Oh my gosh, that was so well written, but more than that, it's kind of like, we've as I guess European descent people have are aware of colonization of other cultures here on Earth. And then what happens when those cultures become independent? It's a little bit like that. And it takes a while for things to stabilize. But this is sort of more about technology and, well, I'll let you tell it because I don't know how much you want. I don't want to give away too much. What they say, loose lips sink ships.
Yeah, I think this might be the longest story in the book, or at least
Hmm.
one of them. And it's basically a story about the future of our planet, which has taken quite a different path than you might expect. Because what happened is scientists started working with elephants to increase their intelligence and basically uplifted them to sentience. And this is a somewhat, I mean, this topic has been explored before, I should say, with a few other authors. And that's kind of what inspired me to do it. But not with elephants so much, who I think are already sentient, honestly. But they quickly became the dominant species. And there was a war, and basically humans lost the war. And not only were elephants uplifted, but several other species. So the planet became a very, very different place. And humans moved down the food chain towards the bottom and are now, as the story is taking place, sort of suffering the possibility of extinction. And there's little colonies left. And this is the story of one little group of people who decide, you know what, we need to do something to make sure that we can ensure our survival. And they take the drastic step, particularly one of the elders, because elephants have elders too. You know, all species do, and they're well respected. So one of the elders of the human society decides to visit the elephants to get some help. And she's got a few cards up her sleeve to get her into Elephant City. And so it's basically an adventure story, which with lots of twists and turns and suspense and all the, you know, things that happen when in an adventure story. I really enjoyed writing this one. It got some great reviews, but it's such a long story that I couldn't really get it published. So I ended up, this is the only story in the collection that wasn't vetted or published in another magazine. But I think it would have if I could have shortened it, but I didn't want to do it. I liked the story the way it was.
Yes, you don't want to leave any of those parts out.
No,
No.
I'm seriously considering expanding it to a full novel length.
Yeah.
Because it could, I think, stand as a novel. But, you know, I love the story. I love how it ended.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, the endings are so important. So many stories I read they're really good in the beginning, and they sort of peter out towards the end. I'm like, oh, it wasn't satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
But this is sort of your standard. I love the classic sci-fi adventure. Don't mind you, I love fantasy too, and I've got a whole bunch of fantasy stories. That's going to be another volume. And
Wonderful.
I also, you know, horror is very popular. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
a huge fan, but every now and then I write a real dark sort of horror story. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna put out a volume of that because I've 40 stories is a lot to choose from, and I'm still getting some published. So
Mm-hmm.
it is something I really enjoy doing. It's quite different than UFOs and the paranormal, because that again is you have to be really accurate and factual.
Mm-hmm.
Where here you have a blank slate. You get to explore ideas and go out to the farthest edges of the universe in your own mind. And Elephant City was an idea that I thought, gosh, I don't think I've ever heard this before. And
No, I hadn't either. I love elephants too. So it
yeah,
was
that
it
was the
was
whole idea.
really it was really interesting how you developed a way of articulating their culture, their status hierarchy, all kinds of things. It was very, very believable and
Yeah,
very, very
there's a book called
interesting.
When Elephants Weep, which I highly recommend because it shows how truly advanced, emotional, sentient, moral elephants are. They care for
Yeah,
the children in ways that, are very reflective of how we do it. Every time there's a show on elephants, I'm like, I'm there because
yeah,
I just find all animals really fascinating. We can learn so much from the animal kingdom. And this
yeah.
was
We
an
really,
exploration of that.
yeah, we really can. I've always been appalled at the way we treat elephants and cetaceans, the big whales. Their brains are so big and so complex. We don't even have a way of interpreting what they're capable of. There was a Star Trek movie about where they had to go back and um, borrow some whales and bring them into the future because they were extinct. And this
Right?
ET um, um, I don't know what you would call it, race or whatever, came to check in with the whales and they weren't there and all hell broke loose. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to make this all about Star Trek. I'm just saying that it's just appalls me at the way elephants are treated and whales are treated, not to mention other animals and the way we treat each other, but that's another story. But I really enjoyed Elephant City, and I highly recommend this book to everybody. Now, the next story, I don't really know how to talk about it without talking about it. It's
Oh,
called Don't Ask. And I laughed so hard, I almost fell right out of my chair at the end of this story. Do you want to say anything about it, or do you want to skip it and leave that as a surprise for the readers?
yeah, this one is a real short story. It's a comic piece. It's about people who are on a starship going to Vega, where, of course, all your supplies are very limited, and hoarding on a starship is verboten, forbidden. If you have something, you have to share it. And some guy has apparently hoarded his supply of coffee. And that's what it's about, because one of the guys, the main character, starts smelling coffee as he's patrolling the corridors and tracks it down to this guy who's hoarding it. But it has a real funny twist. And everyone, of course, gets involved from the captain all the way down.
I thought that was funny too, because the guy with the coffee says, "Don't tell anybody." Okay, I promise I won't. Comes back the next day with 4 people. I told you not to tell anybody. I know, I know. Comes back again with the captain, and it just gets funnier and funnier as the story progresses. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, I had fun with that one. It's a real short story, which is really hard to write, because with a novel, you have lots of room to explore and different backstories and so forth. The shorter the story, the harder it is to write, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
this is, again, comedy, which is also really difficult to write. But I love comedy. My parents had a real strong sense of humor. My older brother, I'm kind of the
Mm-hmm.
joker of the family, really. But
Mm-hmm.
I love comedy so much,
Mm-hmm.
and because it brings light and laughter to our lives. It's a necessary part of our lives.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. So that was a comic story.
That's another thing I love about the book is there was a real balance. There was humor, there was seriousness, there was suspense. I guess we're going to talk about Salvage Yard next. That one was so full of suspense. Oh my gosh, I had to stop and breathe when I was reading it. It was really captivating. It was just so good. Do you want to tell the listeners and the viewers a little bit about Salvage Yard
Yeah,
without giving it away, of course?
I'm so proud of that story. It actually got the cover of the magazine, and there was a critic who looked into it, and he's like, "This is my favorite story of the magazine." I'm like, "Oh wow, it was so cool!" And this story came to me with the idea of a guy who owns a junkyard on the far reaches of space with all these old starships, ones that are not as advanced as the ones that are current, but older ones that are complete wrecks, hollowed out, completely pilfered and salvaged, but still have some value to them. And that's how he makes his living. And it also has a little twist because there's a sort of ET space worm, which comes from my nephew, by the way. He's like, Uncle, write about space fish, space worms. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, I want a story about space worms. I'm like, okay. And so I kind of worked that in, and it's
Mm-hmm.
a fun, classic, old style adventure story. Which is my favorite. I love adventure, and this is all about that because someone comes to visit his salvage yards. It turns out it's a pretty important, influential person with her son,
Mm-hmm.
because he wants to see one of these old light speed ships. And so they end up having a tragedy because, a good adventure story, things go wrong and it just gets worse. They're in real dire straits. And just when you think they've got it fixed, nope, things go even worse. So yeah, it's a fun adventure story, which I really worked hard on to sort of plot it correctly. And yeah, not much more else I can say about it, other than I think if you are a fan of adventure stories in general,
Mm-hmm.
this one will be satisfying to read. I certainly hope so.
Yeah, and again, there was a twist at the end. I thought that was really interesting. Did not see that coming.
A
So,
couple of major twists, actually.
yeah. Well, actually, there was a couple during the story as well. And then that takes us to the last story in the book called A Certain Slant of Light. And what I loved about it is it reminded me of those of us on Earth who perceive things differently, are aware of things that so-called, quote, normal people don't believe in or don't believe could be real, and what it's like to have people not believe us or think that we're crazy. I thought that was very well illustrated in the book. I mean, sorry, in the story. What that is like, and yet if we stick to what our perceptions are telling us, often we have a satisfying outcome in knowing that we were right after all. I don't want to give the
No.
story away.
And this is probably my favorite in the bunch, or certainly one of the top ones, because this is the one that won the Writers of the Future contest, which, by the way, is quarterly, but has several thousand entries per quarter. So to get, the top three out of several thousand is almost inconceivable. And, they pick 8 finalists and then only choose 3 of those. So even if you make a finalist, which it did, your chances are less than 50% of winning.
Mhm.
And when they called and said, "You're a finalist," I thought, you know what? I'm going to win second place. It just came to me and I knew it. And I'd lie there at night waiting to see, was I going to win this contest or not? But I knew I would because I had a feeling. And of course, I did get second place. And it's a very poignant love story. This is basically a
Mhm.
love story with a science fiction background, because what happens is the world is not a good place. Very much like it is today, but things have escalated to a point where there is a nuclear exchange, and it causes a sort of a rip in the timeline, in the time stream, to where these weird time bubbles start appearing all over the planet and freezing people in time. And this poor man, his wife, gets caught in one of these time bubbles, and she's frozen like a statue while everyone outside time is flowing normally. And you can't go in there because it's basically suicide. You'll get stuck too. And he keeps visiting there because his wife is right there at the edge, and he can see her, and he's absolutely convinced she's still alive because he can see her. But of course, all the scientists say, no, this can't be. All research shows that they're just frozen in time, probably dead already. But it's a mystery story as well. Every good
Mhm.
science, like I said, all stories have an element of mystery, some of humor, some of suspense,
Mhm.
romance. This is really romance more than anything. It's about how this guy, Walter, his love for his wife overcomes time and space. And again, it's impossible to really talk about without giving away the end. And I thought, you know what? People are going to guess this because it's a real twist. When this idea dropped into my head, I'm like, ooh, this is a good one. And I'm like, if I can just put this together, if I can execute this correctly, it should do well. But you never know because, being a writer, you're very close to it. And it's really hard to be a judge of your own story. But I knew
Mhm.
it was a good idea. And so I made it as short as I possibly could. It's only, I don't know, 10 pages. It's not a huge story. But, I loved the way it came out. And
Mhm.
turned out it was a good idea because it did win. And, I have first readers that I'll give my stories to. And they'll say, oh, this one didn't quite work for me, or this one worked, but this needs to be changed. Well, I gave it to one of my first readers, Kate is her name. And her note was, wow, that was it. That's all she had to say. Well,
Yeah.
okay, let's send this off.
Mhm.
Yeah, I sent it first to the contest because if you're an, an aspiring writer, I recommend sending all your stuff there first because you get a cash prize, you get a whole workshop, you get to be published in the book with more money for because they'll pay you 5-6 cents per word or whatever it is. It's pro rates, I know that. But yeah, one of my favorite stories for sure, a certain slant of light, which is taken from an Emily Dickinson poem, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He was one of my favorite poets. Poetry is another thing. If you want to be a writer, you should study because it helps you to write your words in a way that have a certain poetry to them.
Mm-hmm. That are pleasant to, make it pleasurable to read for sure. So the book we're talking about is called Wild Speculation. It's Preston Dennett's science fiction stories. It's a collection of 10 science fiction stories. Preston is best known for his nonfiction, where, as an investigator, he looks into people who've had experiences, real life experiences with UFOs and ETs, but he's probably just as well known for his science fiction writing. And I bought the book, and I don't know, wasn't really knowing what to expect from it, but I couldn't put the darn thing down. My dinner was burning, and things were happening, and I just couldn't. I had more overcooked meat that week than ever. It was so good. But
Oh,
more than that, it was also medicine for my soul. It made me feel good. It made me feel connected to humanity and to what's possible. And I just loved it so very, very much. So, Preston, do you have anything else you want to say about wild speculation?
well, I love what you just said there because I am a very optimistic person. I've got hope for humanity. There's a lot of darkness and angst in the world, but I think ultimately we are good people. And given the right circumstances, we would rise to the occasion. So I think you can
Mm-hmm.
see that because there's a lot of writers out there who are real dark, and lots of blood and guts and horror, and that's just not my style. Well, I have written some dark stories. Even those are very hopeful, and I think a lot of beginning writers have certainly noticed this. Have very down-turned endings. It's very bleak. But no, my stories always end with a hopeful note because
Mm-hmm.
that's just my nature. So yeah, that's how I would say. So I like what you said that it gave you a warm feeling because that's definitely what I was going for.
Definitely. So the stories are not only interesting, they're unpredictable, they're completely different than each other. So there's a lot of variety for those of us that like novel stories. It feeds your soul. It helps you to think in a deeper way about humanity, and it's just got so much in one little book. It just blew me away. So I want to thank you, Preston, and I want to highly recommend it to everybody out there. Do visit Preston's website and order it today. It's fantastic. You will be so glad that you did. You'll be recommending it to your friends as well. Preston, what other science fiction books or stories do you have available that people could also, once they've read Wild Speculation, they might want to jump into, including me? I can't wait.
Well, I've got a lot of stories published in various magazines. So if you do punch my name in Amazon, some of them will come up. You'll have to buy the whole magazine or book that they do appear in. But I am planning on putting out future volumes. The next one will be fantasy stories because
Mm-hmm.
fantasy is a huge part of speculative fiction in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I love it because it gives you actually even more freedom. Science fiction basically does have to follow rules of science to a
Mm-hmm.
certain degree, certainly. But fantasy, you get to completely go off the map. So I've got 10 stories that are what we would call fantasy, and some are
Mm-hmm.
sword and sorcery type, and others are more high concept fantasy
Mm-hmm.
stories. But that's coming up next, and yeah, I have written horror stories too because that is hugely popular. For some reason, I think probably because we're dealing with a lot of darkness in our planet
Mm-hmm.
and our species in general. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely plan on writing a novel at some point if I could just find the time. Right now, I'm working on
Yeah,
Symmetry too,
I
which
was going to ask you. So next time, next month in October, you and Dolly will be on, and I'm currently reading the first Symmetry book. absolutely fascinating. And as I think I told you off camera, the first chapter, I was bawling my eyes out because I knew everything you were saying about Dolly's experience was real. And the reason I know is because I've had similar, different again, but similar experiences. And I went, oh my God, because sometimes, when we've had these experiences, it's easier to rationalize that maybe we were dreaming or, have some kind of cover of denial. I think it's how we're able to exist in this three-dimensional world amongst what I'll just loosely call normal people who haven't had these experiences. But Dolly's experience, I don't know, based on what I've experienced, I can vouch 100% for, but it's also so well written because you have kept Dolly's personality intact. You have kept her experiences from her perspective, not trying to change it, into or make sense of it in any other way. So just wonder if you want to talk a little bit about Symmetry 1 and then tell us about Symmetry 2. When can we expect that? How's it coming?
Yeah, I love that book because it's the only time I really got to explore one person's experiences in their entirety. Most of my books
Mm-hmm.
are collections, and it is Dolly's story, and I allow her to tell it in her own words largely. So you will see
Mm-hmm.
extensive quotes from the witness themselves in all my books. And I love what you said because that is exactly why I write these books, because so many people are having these experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear what you're saying all the time. People are like, I know this is true because this is exactly what happened to me. I don't talk about it. And there are little tiny details that really, confirm people's accounts.
Yes.
And these are ones that, even are perhaps not well known within the UFO community.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very unfiltered. It's a very, how would I put this, brutally honest book.
Mm-hmm.
She goes into details that are quite personal
Mm-hmm.
and very detailed.
Mm-hmm.
So I had it was really a joy for me personally because I've talked to a lot of people and I have questions about
Mm-hmm.
what ET contact is like. And there's little blanks in the puzzle of, what exactly, why are they contacting us? What is the onboard experience like? And
Mm-hmm.
Dolly was really able to fill that in to a degree much more extensively than anyone else I've interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
So to hear you say, "Oh yeah, these are little events that bring tears to your eyes because you've experienced this," and I get that from
I
other
was
people.
I was amazed. Now, I didn't have Dolly's what we would call ESP or psychic abilities or anything like that. I'm not trying to say my life has been like Dolly's. Dolly's is quite a unique life experience. But there were things that she said about the inside of the ship that I know from personal experience. And there's no way, like Dolly and I never discussed those things. How could she have the same experience that I'm having? Then I went from there, from going, because I've always said that my experiences are more trans-dimensional. And I'm going, maybe I've had more actual physical
Yeah, when you
three-dimensional
started telling me
contact
when you
than,
started telling me your experiences, I'm like, this sounds a lot like people
yeah.
I've interviewed. Uh, I think this might
And
be physical contact. I'm like, I
maybe,
don't know.
I don't know, but my emotional reaction, I just poured tears because it moved me
Usually,
so deeply. So I really recommend that those of you not only check out Preston's science fiction, but also pick up a copy of Symmetry and and read all about Dolly's experience so that the next month, when Dolly and Preston are on the show, you can ask some questions and comment and participate more in the discussion. That would
that's
be
on
really,
Audible
really great.
too, by the way. It just got put on Audible.
Oh,
Uh,
it is.
yeah, and that was published about 2 years ago. Still on the bestseller list. It's popping on and
Oh,
off, but
it's
it's doing
fantastic.
well.
Yeah, I can't wait to read the rest of it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it gets
So
better and
that,
better, by the way. It's
ah,
I mean, it is a true
wonder.
honest to God adventure story, Dolly's story. And
Yeah.
Symmetry 2 is going to continue that, but we're going to dive deeper into just the direct knowledge, the science and the spirituality and the psychics and the dimensional explanations that she's got directly from the ETs. So it's going to share some really interesting knowledge that I think humanity is sadly lacking or is kind of got a misconception about. So that's going to be really fun to explore.
That sure is. It sure is. I can't wait. So our time is almost up, but I want to give you a couple of minutes, Preston, if there's anything you want to share with the listeners and the viewers, or you want to talk about, tell us about your radio show every Monday night and other things you've got cooking. And for those that are on the audio platforms, maybe say verbally where people can reach you. Of course, all the links will be in the description below.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Thanks for letting me talk about the science fiction, because I almost never get an opportunity, being mostly, about UFOs. So I really enjoyed talking about that. And again, we'll be putting out another one. I do have a website. If you punch my name in on the internet, it will bring you up to my Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, my website, YouTube channel, where I put out an episode each Friday evening. And that's really blowing up. I'm having a lot of fun with that. And of course, Dolly and I do a weekly podcast each Monday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, The Light Gate, where we bring on such wonderful guests like Karen Holton and others. We're going to have you back. But yeah, we're definitely having fun on The Light Gate and keeping busy. Symmetry 2 is the next book. I'm going to be putting out another one on my out-of-body experiences, another science fiction book. One of my older books went out of print. I'm going to be putting that back on. So I'm keeping busy.
Wonderful. Really, really wonderful. Just going to check in with chat one more time. There's Dolly again. Hi, Dolly. I can't wait to have you on next month. This is so great. I had Preston and Dolly both on a show. I can't remember if it was Quantum Guide Show or this show. And Preston had microphone problems, and he kind of got gypped. So that's why we're having him back on by himself today. But then I can't wait to have he and Dolly both back next month. So thank you everybody for joining us. Those of you on the live chat, those of you who are watching the replay. And please do share this episode with your family and your friends. And please do order Wild Speculation. You will not be disappointed. And of course, Symmetry as well. Thank you, Preston. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week on Aliens and Angels. Thank you for joining me for the Aliens and Angels podcast. Become the change that you wish to see in the world. Subscribe to my YouTube, Rumble, and X channels at Karen Holton TV. Click the like button, leave me a comment, and share this podcast with your friends. Check out my website at www.karenholtonhealthcoach.com to see my free resources and amazing products and services. All of the links will be in the description below. As part of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, you will also find the Quantum Guide Show with Karen Holton on all audio platforms. Until next time, keep up the good work.